My wife won $9 million, then threw me out overnight. But the prenup they forced on me is about to cost them everything. I come from a modest background. My parents live in a peaceful suburban neighborhood, and I grew up in a small 3-bedroom house that always carried the comforting scent of freshly washed clothes and home-cooked meals. After finishing high school, I took on various jobs, from working as a bartender to helping out at my uncle's hardware store. Eventually, I ended up managing a local sporting goods shop. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was honest work. My wife, on the other hand, came from a completely different world, one I had never experienced before. Her family owned multiple properties, drove luxury cars, and hosted extravagant parties several times a year. Let's call my father-in-law Richard and my mother-in-law Karen. Karen was an intimidating presence, always carrying herself with a quiet authority. She had a way of making seemingly casual remarks that felt more like hidden threats or manipulation. She also had a subtle way of showing disapproval. Just one raised eyebrow could make people feel small. While they were never openly rude to me, I could always sense their dissatisfaction beneath their polite conversations. After my wife and I got engaged, I quickly realized how much her parents feared outsiders getting their hands on their family's wealth. No matter how long my wife and I had been together, they still treated me as an intruder. Before we could even set a wedding date, Richard insisted that I sign a prenuptial agreement. I didn't have the resources to fight it, and at the time, I was blinded by love. I kept convincing myself that it was just a formality to ease her parents' concerns. After all, wasn't love the only commitment that truly mattered? I remember the day I signed the document as if it happened yesterday. It was a warm afternoon in their massive home. Richard laid the contract in front of me and slid a pen my way, offering me a cup of coffee like it was just another business deal. My wife stood off to the side, barely saying a word. That stung, but I brushed it off, believing it wouldn't make a difference in the long run. The contract stated that any inheritance, gifts, or trust funds from her family would always belong to her. However, anything we acquired together, such as a house or even lottery winnings, would be considered shared property. I found it strange, but at the time, my only concern was marrying the woman I loved. 6 months later, we had a breathtaking lakeside wedding. My parents were overwhelmed by the extravagance, but remained supportive. My father, however, seemed uneasy when he greeted my in-laws. He had always taught me to trust my instincts, but I thought love would erase any doubts. The first few years of our marriage went by without any major issues. We lived in a condo that her parents had helped us secure. I made monthly mortgage payments, even though the down payment had come from her father. Looking back, it was never really a gift. It was a way for them to maintain control over us. But at the time, I assumed that's just how wealthy families operated. Like any couple, we had disagreements over finances. But the real problem was her parents constantly interfering. They would show up unannounced, bring in new furniture, change the decor, and sometimes even rearrange our entire home without asking. Whenever I voiced my frustration, my wife would brush it off, saying that's just how her parents showed support. Then came the moment that turned everything upside down. One day, my wife called me, barely able to contain her excitement. She had won a $9 million lottery jackpot from a random ticket she bought at a gas station. At first I was thrilled, imagining a future where we could quit our jobs and travel the world. But my excitement soon faded. She insisted we keep it a secret, even from my parents. She became unusually paranoid, constantly talking about handling the money the right way and meeting with lawyers I had never even heard of. When I asked to be part of these meetings, she dismissed me, saying I wouldn't understand, which hurt more than I let on. But the real shock came a few weeks later. One evening, I arrived home from work, exhausted, only to find her rummaging through drawers with her aunt. She barely looked at me before casually announcing that she was filing for divorce. She then told me to pack my things and leave, claiming the condo was in her name. I was stunned. Yes, I had been making monthly mortgage payments, but in her mind, the down payment from her father and her newfound fortune meant I was no longer necessary. I felt my heart shatter. With a trembling voice, I called my father and told him that I had just been thrown out of my own home. It was the ultimate betrayal. But the biggest shock was yet to come. I soon discovered that my father-in-law had sent his personal lawyer to safeguard my wife's interests. Their plan was simple: get rid of me so they could keep the lottery winnings entirely separate from me. However, they had overlooked one crucial detail: the very prenuptial agreement they had forced me to sign. Instead of fully shielding their daughter, the document clearly stated that any sudden financial gain during the marriage would be considered shared property. That's when I realized something important. If they rushed to divorce me right after winning the jackpot, they might not be able to keep the money all to themselves. I knew I had to tread carefully. My father urged me to stay composed, find a lawyer who wasn't connected to my in-laws' social circle, and prepare for a brutal legal battle. I had no intention of backing down. They had treated me like I was disposable, as if I didn't matter. If they thought I would walk away quietly, they were in for a rude awakening. For the next few nights, I stayed at my parents' house, trying to process everything. My mother was livid, shouting about how my in-laws had been disrespectful from the very beginning. My father, though just as furious, remained level-headed. He reached out to an old friend, a family law attorney, and arranged for me to meet him the next morning. Sitting in the lawyer's office, I felt a mix of anger and relief. I laid everything out: how my in-laws had insisted on the prenup, how my wife had won $9 million, and how she had then blindsided me with divorce. The lawyer skimmed through the prenup and let out a chuckle. "They really messed up," he said. "The way this is worded, lottery winnings are considered marital assets. Unless a judge makes some unusual ruling, you're legally entitled to a significant portion." That was a glimmer of hope. I had feared that the prenup would leave me with nothing, but in their desperation to protect their inheritance, my in-laws had overlooked the possibility of a lottery win. My lawyer warned me that this wasn't going to be easy. My in-laws were wealthy, well-connected, and would undoubtedly throw everything they had into fighting this. But given my financial contributions to the marriage, and the fact that I had been forcibly kicked out of our shared home, we had a solid case. I asked him how long a contested divorce could take in our state. He explained that it could drag on for months or even longer, but if my wife's side realized they had a weak case, they might try to settle quickly. He also warned me that they would likely attempt to pressure or intimidate me into walking away with little to nothing. Sure enough, within a few days, my father-in-law left me a threatening voicemail, warning me to step aside because I deserved nothing from his daughter. He even claimed that if I tried to claim any of the lottery money, he would ensure I walked away empty-handed. My lawyer simply told me to save every message and document every interaction. Then my mother-in-law showed up outside my parents' house, offering me what she called a generous deal. She framed it as an easy, quiet way out, but the amount she proposed wasn't even enough to cover half of the mortgage payments I had been making. I refused and told her I'd see her in court. She looked baffled, clearly not used to people rejecting her money. With negotiations going nowhere, my lawyer took legal action to prevent the lottery winnings from being hidden or transferred. That enraged my in-laws. They responded by spreading rumors, calling me a gold digger who had manipulated their daughter for money. It hurt, but I refused to let it break me. My boss, who owned the sporting goods store where I worked, stood by me, dismissing my father-in-law's attempts to interfere with my job. Friends took sides. Some accused me of being petty, while others supported me for standing up for myself. The stress was overwhelming, but I refused to give in. After several weeks of failed negotiations, we finally secured a court date. My wife was nowhere to be seen. She remained hidden under her parents' protection, avoiding any direct contact with me. Instead, she let her lawyer speak for her, painting me as a freeloader who had contributed nothing to the marriage. My lawyer immediately challenged their claims, presenting financial records, bills, time-sharing details, and, most importantly, the specific clause in the prenuptial agreement regarding sudden financial gains. We also highlighted the fact that I had been unfairly forced out of our home. The judge instructed both parties to prepare for a formal hearing on asset division. In a final act of intimidation, my father-in-law once again tried to threaten my employer, but my boss stood his ground, making it clear that he wasn't afraid of him. That only made my father-in-law even angrier. My lawyer urged us to move forward cautiously, but he was confident that a judge would recognize their intimidation tactics for what they were. Nothing could have fully prepared me for the intense battle ahead in court, but I knew the law was on my side, ironically, because of the very prenuptial agreement they had forced upon me. As the weeks passed, the tension leading up to the hearing became overwhelming. My wife still refused to speak to me directly, but her legal team bombarded me with endless motions, arguing that the lottery winnings belonged solely to her since she was the one who purchased the ticket. However, the prenuptial agreement clearly stated that any significant financial windfall during the marriage was considered shared property. Meanwhile, my father-in-law worked behind the scenes to damage my reputation, spreading false claims that I had only married into their family for financial gain. Through all of this, I felt a mix of frustration and determination. If they thought they could pressure me into walking away from what was legally mine, they were wrong. I had proof that I had financially contributed to our life together: electricity bills, grocery receipts, and half of the mortgage payments. My lawyer and I combed through every detail of the prenup, and he pointed out a crucial clause. Any financial windfalls, including but not limited to lottery or game show winnings, were to be considered shared assets unless specifically stated otherwise. It was as if my in-laws had unintentionally left a loophole wide open. 1 week before the hearing, we attended a preliminary status conference. My wife showed up with her parents and an entire legal team, 4 lawyers and a financial advisor. They regarded me with the same condescending expressions as always, but their confidence wavered when my lawyer discreetly presented the section of the prenup that addressed lottery winnings. The judge listened carefully, appeared unimpressed by their attempts to downplay the case, and ruled that all major assets be frozen until the full hearing. That same day, outside the courthouse, my mother-in-law approached me privately, insisting that we have a mature conversation. She offered me a lump sum, significantly lower than what she had proposed before, calling it a generous offer for someone of my financial background. Once again, I refused, telling her that we would let the judge decide. She lashed out, accusing me of tearing the family apart, as if I had been the one to file for divorce out of nowhere. The hypocrisy infuriated me, but I kept my emotions in check. My lawyer had warned me not to engage in any heated arguments that could later be used against me. Behind closed doors, I feared that my in-laws might try to conceal the lottery winnings by transferring them into hidden accounts. Anticipating this, my lawyer filed court motions to prevent any large financial transactions. Additionally, we arranged for a forensic accountant to investigate if there were any signs of them moving money illegally. My father-in-law's temper boiled over. He left me a furious voicemail, calling me names and accusing me of stealing the happiness from his daughter's life. It was laughable, considering they were the ones who had kicked me out the moment they got rich. As the court date approached, my legal team and I carefully mapped out every detail of our strategy. We rehearsed my statements, ensuring I would come across as calm and factual. I gathered all the necessary documents, the prenup, proof of my mortgage contributions, and even text messages from my wife confirming our shared household expenses. My lawyer advised me to keep my responses brief, as the evidence itself would speak louder than any argument. If my in-laws resorted to emotional manipulation, we would counter with hard facts. On the morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse, my heart pounding. My parents were there for moral support, though they chose to wait outside rather than sit through the proceedings. Inside the courtroom, I spotted my wife seated beside her father, both with cold, unreadable expressions. Her mother sat further back, arms crossed. My father-in-law's legal team, polished and self-assured in their expensive suits, exuded confidence, perhaps believing that money and influence could override the truth. The judge, a sharp and no-nonsense woman in her 50s, wasted no time. She invited both sides to present their arguments. My wife's lead attorney attempted to paint me as someone who had contributed little to the marriage beyond simply living in the same space. They claimed that the lottery purchase was a private transaction made with her own money, but my lawyer remained composed. He pointed out the explicit wording in the prenup, which categorized unexpected financial gains as shared assets. He then produced bank records showing that my wife had used our joint account card on the day she purchased the ticket. As the evidence was presented, I noticed a shift in my father-in-law's camp. Their confident facade cracked and tension filled the air. The judge turned to them and asked if they had any additional documents proving that the lottery ticket had been bought with solely her personal funds. They struggled to come up with a solid defense, claiming that the joint account had been used by mistake, or that the funds had actually come from my father-in-law's deposit. However, the financial statements clearly listed both of our names, not just hers. The judge took notice, shifting her attention toward them with an expectant look. Eventually, my wife broke her silence. She hesitated before stating that she never intended to hurt me, and that her parents had pressured her into filing for divorce after the lottery win to safeguard their family's wealth. Her words stumbled over one another as she tried to justify her actions, admitting she had felt overwhelmed, but also insisting that secrecy was necessary to protect us from outsiders who might try to claim the money. My lawyer calmly asked if she had ever consulted me before making these decisions. She admitted she had not. The judge's disapproval was unmistakable. By midday, it had become increasingly clear that the very prenuptial agreement my in-laws had insisted on was now working against them. The same document they had designed to shield their assets was now the legal basis for granting me a significant share of the lottery winnings. The court scheduled a second hearing to finalize the division of assets, with the judge emphasizing that the winnings would be treated as a major marital asset subject to fair distribution. Outside the courthouse, my father-in-law passed by me, muttering under his breath, "This isn't over." But his shaken demeanor suggested otherwise. In the weeks leading up to the final ruling, their desperation escalated. His legal team scrambled to file motions attempting to amend the prenuptial agreement, arguing that lottery winnings were never meant to be included. The judge swiftly rejected their motions, pointing out that the contract's wording was unambiguous. My mother-in-law approached me yet again, this time issuing a veiled threat, warning that I would regret it if I continued to hurt their family. I met her gaze and firmly reminded her that they were the ones who had blindsided me with an eviction and a sudden divorce. My wife also attempted to reach out, leaving me a tearful voicemail in which she pleaded for a peaceful resolution. She suggested we come to a private agreement, hinting that doing so might even allow us to salvage some of our relationship. Perhaps, under different circumstances, I would have considered it. But after all the deception, manipulation, and efforts to push me out, my trust in her and her family had been completely shattered. My lawyer cautioned me against engaging in backdoor negotiations. We had a solid legal standing, and there was no reason to accept a lesser settlement out of fear or sentimentality. Then, the day of the final hearing arrived. The courtroom was filled with legal teams from both sides. My parents and a few close friends sat quietly in the back, offering their silent support. The judge took her seat, reviewed the updated case files, and allowed both sides to make their closing arguments. My father-in-law's lead attorney made one last desperate attempt to vilify me, portraying me as a scheming opportunist who had only uncovered the prenup's loophole after benefiting from their family's generosity. My lawyer responded with nothing but the facts. I had been forced to sign the prenuptial agreement under their terms. The document explicitly categorized lottery winnings as a shared asset. My father-in-law had contributed to our condo, but I had consistently made monthly payments, meaning it was never exclusively their property. The immediate divorce filing after the jackpot win was clear evidence that their intent had always been to keep me from receiving any of the money. The judge listened carefully before delivering her ruling. She declared that, per the prenup's terms, the lottery winnings were undeniably part of the marital estate. She sternly reprimanded my in-laws for trying to twist the very agreement they had drafted to suit their convenience. Furthermore, she ruled that my sudden expulsion from the condo had been unjust, and I was legally entitled to reimbursement for my share of the mortgage payments and my financial contributions to the marriage. In summary, the judge ruled that I was entitled to a substantial share of the lottery winnings, along with reimbursement for my portion of the condo investment. We left the courtroom with a finalization date scheduled in the coming weeks to handle the remaining paperwork. My father-in-law's face was dark with rage, while my mother-in-law hissed angrily under her breath as she spoke to him. My wife, standing motionless, had tears in her eyes. Whether from true regret or sheer frustration over losing such a massive sum, I couldn't tell. A mix of triumph and sorrow filled me. Once, we had loved each other, but greed, parental manipulation, and their blatant attempts to take advantage of me had destroyed everything. In the aftermath, their legal team attempted to propose a slightly adjusted settlement, likely assuming I'd be tempted to take a reduced amount to avoid any further disputes. My lawyer, however, strongly advised against it, insisting that we stick to the judge's ruling. There was no reason to accept less than what had already been granted. The only compromise I made was relinquishing any claim to the condo. I had no desire to set foot in that place ever again. Eventually, they handed me a check for an incredible sum. Was it half of the jackpot? Not exactly, but it was still more than enough to allow me to rebuild my life on my own terms. Through it all, I came to realize that my in-laws had always believed their wealth and influence would shield them from any consequences. They never imagined that I would fight back, let alone succeed. Ironically, the very prenuptial agreement they had forced upon me ended up being the key to securing my rightful share of the winnings. If ever there was an example of poetic justice, this was it. As for my wife, from what I've heard, she remains under her parents' control. Her reputation has taken a serious hit within her social circle due to the fallout from this ordeal. Some mutual acquaintances have told me she struggles with guilt, though I doubt she'll ever truly admit how much of this was orchestrated by her family. To show my gratitude for their unwavering support, I used part of my settlement to help my parents renovate their home. Another portion was wisely invested. Although this experience left lasting scars and forever changed my perspective on trust, marriage, and money, I take comfort in knowing that I stood my ground. I refused to let them intimidate me into settling for mere scraps. While the process was excruciatingly painful, the outcome felt like a victory against oppression. Now, free from my in-laws' deceitful grasp, I am moving forward. Life has returned to a simpler rhythm, one that oddly resembles my days before marriage. But I am no longer the naive man they assumed they could trample. I am stronger, wiser, and fully aware of my own resilience. If they remember anything about me, it should be that they unknowingly gave me the very legal tool I needed to prevent my financial ruin. They started this battle, but I finished it. And with that, this chapter comes to an end. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.